All right, what is going on, y'all? So today I'm going to be talking about academic research and annotated bibliographies. So let's just get into it because this might be a bit of a longer video because I'm going to be showing you guys how to actually go about doing academic research and also how to write an annotated bibliography. So let's get started. So first off, though, I do think we should answer what makes academic research academic, right? Why is that different from just general research? Well, not all sources and not all the way we cite things is not always the same, right? So currently, the way you guys have been quoting readings is a way for you to craft an argument using solely your brain combined with a provided piece of literature, right? So it's just your ideas and just quoting directly from the text. So this works totally fine for magazine articles or a blog or any sort of low stakes writing where the work is opinionated and ideally the person who is reading it understands that it's opinionated, right? So as I'm reading a New York Times article and it's making all these claims about a book or something, I'm keeping in the back of my mind okay, this is this one person's idea or this one person's interpretation of this book, right? However, if we are trying to say set a precedent, right, where people all around the world are going to kind of have to change what they see as the truth, right, as a scientific truth, we need definitive proof that the argument that we're making is valid and worth considering, right? So, for example, sometimes I use this example that say the people who claimed that climate change was in fact real, right? They couldn't just come to the table with a paper that said yeah, dude, the world is getting warmer. I'm pretty sure you can't sway people with just an argument, right? You can't just be your voice and you can't say, "Oh, I took the temperature last year around this time and I took it this year around this time and it's warmer this year," right? I'm sure as many people probably know, there was a ton of research that went into proving that climate change was in fact happening. They collected research over a bunch of years. They compiled that together and had it reviewed. They did the research and people also reviewed the research itself. And then they put that into a paper and then that paper was edited by other people. And ultimately it would go to publishing. And that final publication would then establish that climate change is a truth, it is reality in science, in academia, right? So there's a whole process that goes into academic research that's way beyond just what a normal magazine article would do. There's the biggest thing is that there's a bunch of different people involved. In a New York Times article, there's probably just one editor, right? It's the writer and maybe an editor. And then with academic research, depending I'm sure with climate change, there's probably hundreds of people involved in that, right? There's people who's researching, there's people who's checking the research, there's people who are writing it, there's people who are editing that writing, all this stuff, right? So there's a lot more people involved, and all of those people that are involved in this process are keeping each other in check, right? They're making sure that they're doing their jobs right and that they're not just claiming things that aren't true. And that's why we can take it as more valid, as more reliable. So I mention all this because this is different than the sort of research we had done, especially if you took Professor Solinger's 101, where you guys were just finding, these sort of general articles on, like New York Times or Wired or these other websites where you guys were looking for opinionated pieces. So in that case, it worked. And maybe you've done that for other classes. But in this case, we want to be doing academic research where we're finding peer-reviewed, truly robust papers. So once we understand that, right, how do we start to look for these sort of reliable academic sources? Well, before doing any sort of research, you want to have a clear idea of what you're looking for, right? Because if you just start looking at all the papers related to trifles with no idea in mind or no goal, you're just going to be wasting a lot of time. You're going to be reading a lot of these papers, but you won't know when you've come across one that you can use because you don't know what you're trying to use it for. So I would say have a general argument in your mind, but also be willing to adapt that argument in case, adapt it to the evidence and research that you find. So sometimes you might want to make a really specific argument. But if you can't find the research to back it up, it's not worth, using all your time to try to manipulate the research that's out there to fit your claim. It's going to be much easier if you actually just change your argument or in the first place come up with an argument that research out there will support. So for example, if we look at this first question, right, what is the role of female friendship slash bonding slash cooperation in trifles? Well, let's say I wanted to make a very bold, sort of outlandish claim, and I wanted to say that the role of female friendship in trifles is to show how is a stand-in for what am I trying to say? The role in female friendship is to dismantle the patriarchy and to establish a matriarchy. These women are showing that men are outdated and that the matriarchy will be the new norm. So they're dismantling the patriarchy. That would be my argument, right? a very outlandish argument, right? Because nowhere in the play does it really say that these women are trying to establish a matriarchy. So, am I going to find any evidence out there in peer-reviewed articles? Probably not, right? So it would have to, like, I'd have to do so much like manipulation of the research to try to make it work, and it just wouldn't. So it's much easier to come up with an argument that is actually tame and is like actually going to be proven by the articles that already exist. Um, so I say this because actually, in the sort of writing that we've been doing, I might have been able to argue that these women were trying to establish a matriarchy because I could just use the text, I could just use the play, and I could sort of manipulate it to make it seem like that, and then just use my own writing. But in this case, because I have to find academic research, there's nobody out there who's probably making that argument, and so I'm not going to find anything that's supporting it, right? So I have to temper, my argument to make it something that other people have also already talked about. So that's the thing is with academic research and with a paper that's going this sort of route, you're going to be making an argument that's probably already been made or a similar argument has already been made, right? So now that we've covered that, the questions themselves, like what are you going to be answering? So we already went over number 1. Number 2 says, what are the rewards of paying close attention to things people tend to overlook in trifles and the fish? So in this case, you only have 2 options to choose from. So just decide on a question and then come up with a general answer or direction. In my case, I definitely would choose number 1. I just think it's a little bit more interesting. It brings in, like female friendship, so there's like gender dynamics at play. Also, the female friendship, deals a lot with like the idea of justice, like what is true justice, and I would like to focus on that. So I would go with number 1. So once I have that in mind, you can move on to the actual research portion. So let's say I choose question number 1, and my general argument is that female friendship in the play takes on the role of a vigilante, right? So the women are a stand-in for true justice versus the men in the play, which, are supposed to represent kind of the justice system, right? So that would be my argument. So now I know when I'm going to research that I'm looking for like papers that are talking about trifles, but are specifically dealing with justice system, the law, and anything like that. So now that I know what I'm looking for, we can actually go to start researching. So let's actually just Google BMCC library. Should pop up right with this page. You click on that. And, there's a lot of buttons here if you guys have never used this. I typically don't. When I was doing research for college, I usually just stuck to JSTOR because JSTOR is the one that I found to be the most like all-encompassing database. But in this case, it's nice to also have access to more resources. So you can go to BMCC library, pops up to this page, go to databases, and then databases by subject. We are, what is it called? English and literature. Where are you? Here we go. And then click go. And so it will basically sort the databases to show, oh, here's what's, most aligned with, English and literature. So JSTOR still pops up, which, is a popular database. Maybe you guys have used that before. But it also has a few other ones here. So there's Academic Search Complete, Gale Literary Sources, Project Muse. So let's try like Academic Search Complete. What does that come up with? So in this case, right, you can like enter keywords, you can enter just an author. So we'll say trifles, Susan Glasbell, and here it has sort of like other keywords too. So if you want to talk about gender roles or something like that, you could try that. But I just want to see all the articles relating to this play, just to see how many are out there. So I'll click on that, and I see 12. So not many, but like I can still look through these and see what's going on. So remember, in my case, what I'm looking for is something related to the justice system, related to law. So I'm going to be looking for the keywords that show that. So I see a jury of her peers. That's actually the article I'll talk about because that's the one that I found. But it says jury, so that's a good idea of like, oh, that's related to, that. Silent justice, I probably want to look at this article because it says justice in it, right? Same one. That'll happen sometimes. Sometimes the paper is published in multiple places, so that might be why it pops up multiple times. And I'm not really finding much else. The Trifles and Legally Blonde, I don't think that's Legally Blonde. It's legal, but I don't think that's necessarily the type of paper I'm looking for. Okay, so that was Academic Search Complete. Let's try Project Muse. So I'll click on that one. I've already looked at it, so I'll just enter that, see how many papers pop up. 155. So quite a lot. So if you guys have never used these sort of databases, try to get familiar with like this filtering system because that's going to be your best bet. In this case, I mean 155 is still quite a lot, but if you're ever doing research for certain papers and on a broader topic, right? This is one specific play. If you're doing research on, sort of a field of science or something, there might be thousands of articles out there. So the best way that you're gonna find the research that you need is getting familiar with these filtering systems and like knowing, how to use them to sort through like all of that data. Um, so in this case, let's just go to JSTOR though, because that's actually where I found the article that I'll discuss. And I can type in trifles, Susan Glasgow, and 159 results, so still quite a lot. And I like JSTOR's filtering because it's robust enough, but it's not like so like the last one we looked at like had a lot of buttons. I'm like, there's too much going on. Here I like it because it has subjects, and in my case, it's really nice because remember I was talking about justice system, the law. There's literally one that says law, so I can click on that. And ironically enough, the first one that pops up is actually the one that I found for my paper, or like that I would use for my paper. So that works for me. There is some other filtering sort of stuff, so make sure like, obviously, I mean, yeah, you could filter by English if you needed to. If I uncheck that, oh yeah, make sure it should be set by default, but make sure it's set to content I can access. If it's set to everything, you might come across just like basically stuff that is locked behind a paywall. So it might give you like a summary or like the abstract of an article, but it won't give you the full thing. So obviously you want to have the full like access to all of it. And then also you can sort, you probably just want to be looking at journals, not just like chapters and not, I don't even know what serials is. I don't know what that means. So in this case, you would check journals. In this case, date doesn't really matter. That's for probably like science-based research. So say it was climate change, you were doing a paper on climate change, you'd probably want to only look at articles in the last like 5 to 10 years because climate change is changing constantly, right? So you want to look at stuff that's more relevant to like the recent times. But in this case, it's an older play anyways, and it doesn't really matter when the article came out, so we can still look at articles from whenever. But keep that in mind. There will be certain subjects where the date might matter, or will matter. But in this case, we can filter by law, and we can look at Susan Glasbell's A Jury of Her Peers and Trifles. So again, I clicked on this one because it said a jury, and I was like, oh, that might be what I need. And then I also filtered by law, so I knew I had to deal with like legal stuff, which is what I was looking for. So I started parsing through this article, and it actually breaks it down in like really sort of digestible chunks, at least for me. It breaks up, like in the beginning, it kind of talks about some symbols. So it talks about the canary, the cage, the quilt, and then it kind of kept scrolling down. And this is what I do with like every time I look through these articles, I literally just look at the titles of each one. I'm not going to just start by reading the first page, right? You're going to waste so much time if you do that. So just look at like the overview, the titles, look at how they're organizing their paper, and try to see like narrow it down and see where you're going to use it. So then as I'm scrolling, I'm like, okay, this is the law section, right? So they're getting into like self-defense, talked about the like insanity, provocation, right? And actually, if we go back up, where was it? One of the first ones is rebellion and nullification. So I saw that and I was like, rebellion, right? Like if these women I'm claiming that they're vigilantes, that's kind of rebellious. This might have something I need. And quite literally, the first sentence. The women in the story engage in a silent conspiracy of rebellion against man-made law, thereby nullifying it. Martha Hale's statement, the law is the law, and a bad stove is a bad stove, speaks of a law that does not recognize, and therefore does not take into account the conditions of an abused woman's existence. That is like exactly what I need. That's like the perfect quote. I mean, it literally says, they engage in a silent conspiracy of rebellion against man-made law, thereby nullifying it. So that proves, or that is like, directly supporting my idea that these women are implementing their own sense of justice, right? That they are vigilantes and that they are nullifying the existing law. So I would use this article. That'd be perfect. Obviously, I'd have to find 2 other articles. For the sake of time, we're not going to do all that. And if you're making a similar argument, you still have to do some work yourself. I can't do everything for you. But yeah, so just, know that this would take some time. I was lucky that like I found this article within like 10 minutes of researching. But, finding all 3 will probably take you at least an hour, maybe 2, maybe more than that. Because, again, if you're making kind of a specific argument, you're going to have to parse a lot of these, papers and find the exact quote that you're looking for. And sometimes you don't have to quote directly, you can summarize sort of, a body of text, but you still have to find, you know, the writing that's out there that does exist. So if it's taking you a long time, don't feel overwhelmed. It's just kind of part of the process. Set aside some time to do this sort of research. And again, if you have a clearer idea of what you're trying to argue, in my case, I knew this is what my argument was. It's going to be so much faster to find the evidence that you're looking for. If your idea or your claim is very vague, it's going to take you way longer because you don't even know what you're arguing in the first place. So now that we have that, we can move on to the next part. So we have, I found some research. I showed you guys how to actually go about conducting that. How do we implement these into our paper? So an annotated bibliography, what is that? How do we do it? So it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a bibliography, which is basically the same as a works cited, and it just has a small annotation or a note, right? And that annotation has to answer 3 questions. So how do you know the source is reliable? What is this source about? And how do you plan on using that source in your paper? So it should be about 150 words, around 4 to 6 sentences, and make sure that everything is answered in your own words. So sometimes, like I said, there might be an abstract or there might be a summary of what the paper is about, like the academic paper is about at the beginning of it. Don't just copy and paste the abstract and put it in your paper and say, oh, this is what it's about. Give a summary of that abstract, right? Use your own words because 1, that's plagiarism, and 2, it's still probably too long to fit into the bibliography. You just want to be summarizing in your own words and giving us a general idea of, what it's about and then breaking down why you're going to be using it. So we can start looking at that. So, well, first, I guess you'll still need a citation. So it's nice. I don't know about the other databases, but in JSTOR at least, it has literally like a cite button. So you click on this. We're in MLA, so you'll click copy, right? And then you'll go to your thing. I have this all here, so let's delete that real quick. You'll format it correctly, which means, hey, stop that. No, okay, wait, let me just do this. We'll come back to this, but for the sake of this video, I'll show you guys actually how to do it. Insert new page. Okay. So you'll center it like you would with a works cited. Whoops. Annotated bibliography. Boom. Then I'm in double spaced, Times New Roman, right? Am I double spaced? Yeah, I am. And then if you're on Mac, you can, because sometimes if you just Command V, the formatting gets weird. So if you do Control Command V, it should pop up with this window, and you can go to unformatted text, and that will just copy and paste the text. So if you copied a different font, right, it will disregard that, and it will paste in the font that you have selected already, which is nice. It's it just saves some time. So in this case, paste the exact font I have, same size, and it double spaced it. So perfect. Only thing we need to change is that the first line should be all the way to the left, but the second one should be indented. But if I just press tab, the whole thing gets indented. So what you have to do is you have to delete that line, then enter or return, and then press tab. And then press tab on this one. So all the way to the left, and then these 2 are indented. Also, ideally, this link will be clickable. If it's not, you just usually have to press space after it. But then you can't delete the space in here, so I don't really know. Oh, wait, now I can. I don't know. Word is weird. If it's not clickable, if you got it directly from the site, it should work. So, we can just copy and paste it, but whatever. So that's just the citation, right? Remember, MLA, you don't number them. They're not numbered like this. You do it in the order of last name alphabetically. So in this case, it would, depending on the authors, it would probably be Angel first. Say I had I don't know, Barbara or something next, it would be B, and then, whatever comes after. So it goes in alphabetical order, last name. So that's how we do it. So then we go after, and your annotation will start here on its own line. Annotation. And remember, not indented, but over here. Sometimes, if I just enter, it'll be this. Just hit delete, and it'll go here. So that annotation starts on this line, and remember, it's about 150 words. About 150 words. And you'll just answer those questions that we talked about. So quickly, we can look at an example. So this is in, actually, well, I'm going to show my own example, but you can find this in the course resources, right? And then you can look at this. And this will give you an idea of, how this student has done it for all three of them. But I wrote my own, so we can go to that one. So if we scroll up, so it's the exact same citation, right? And then I just give my annotation here. So the one thing that I did notice, and professor can talk about it in class, is that at least the video he linked me says that you should describe why this is a reliable source. The student did not do that. They just did a summary and then talked about why they would be using the source in their essay. Obviously, we have the citation right here, so we can look at the source and determine ourselves if it's reliable or not. So maybe that's why professor doesn't really care if you guys describe it. But for my example, I did just put in a sentence at the beginning saying why it's reliable. So in my case, I said, this source is reliable because it's published by the Journal of Legal Education, which is edited by faculty at currently Southwestern Law School and Northeastern University of Law. And before I read the rest, if you're wondering oh, how do you know that? How do you know it's so reliable? Well, if we go to the article that I looked at, right, which is this one, the same article. Well, if you look at all this junk up here, right, you're like, what does all this mean? Well, this is where it's published. This is the volume. This is the issue number, all this stuff, right? The pages of that journal, right? Because this is actually a subset, or this is one part of a very big journal. So if we look at the actual journal, it's a clickable link, and I click on that, it gives me a little blurb talking about this journal, Legal Education. What is that? The journal is edited for a term of years by faculty at a member of school or school. This is currently, Southwestern Law School and Northeastern University of Law are providing the editorial leadership, as well as administrative and financial support. So it's being edited by 2 law schools, right? So that's a pretty big marker as to why it's reliable, right? So that's why I put that in there, and that's how I know that. If it's not a clickable link and you can't find, you can't just click on Journal of Legal Education, look it up. Look up who edits or who's in charge of the Journal of Education, right? Or Journal of Legal Education, and you'll find other stuff. So that's how you could quote unquote prove that's reliable. But again, I guess we'll talk about whether or not you need this sentence at the beginning. Then I go into my summary. So I say the paper begins by breaking down some of the symbols and trifles by Susan Glasbell, like the symbol of the canary, the cage, the quilt, and more. It later assesses the play through various legal or law-related lenses, such as rebellion nullification, the insanity defense, self-defense, and more. So I'm using and more here because, again, we're just giving a summary. You don't have to say, the article or the paper has 6 or 7 topics for each of these. So I don't need to list every single one. I just need to talk about what it's generally covering and what it's related to, and then talk about why specifically I'm using it. The why you're using it is probably the most important part. So I say, I'll be using a quote from the rebellion and nullification section, which says, quote, the women in the story engage in a silent conspiracy of rebellion against man-made law, thereby nullifying it. Martha Hale's statement, the law is the law and a bad stove is a bad stove, speaks of a law that does not recognize and therefore does not take into account the conditions of an abused woman's existence. This directly reinforces my claim that the women play the role of a vigilante, implementing their own sense of justice as they see fit. So, again, I covered those 3 questions. I talked about why this is a reliable source. I gave my general overview or summary of the source itself, and then I talked specifically about why I'm using it in my paper. You don't have to have a specific quote from the paper. You could just paraphrase or summarize parts of the academic paper, but it does help if you have a specific quote. And if you don't, you just have to be really specific in what section you're using and why you're using that section and how it ties in. And when you're using it in your paper, you still have to cite it, right? You can't just kind of summarize it, right? It's you're still using a specific part of it. But I guess professor will talk about, actually, let's look at because I know you need 3 sources, but I don't know if you can just paraphrase. Oh my God, I have so many tabs open. Here we go. Yeah, I don't know if you need 3 specific quotes or if you're allowed to paraphrase. He can answer this question in class. But even if you do paraphrase, and if that's allowed, it still has to be from a specific section of the paper, right? You're not just kind of summarizing the whole paper because that's not really useful. You want to be having a specific argument and tying one part of the paper into that argument. So I think that covers almost everything. How am I doing on time? How long has this been? Okay, 25 minutes, not bad. The last one was 35. So sometimes I have to record these a few times just to figure out what the hell I'm saying. Like I said before, though, research takes time. This might take you half an hour, this might take you an hour, this might take you 2 or 3 hours. It really depends on how specific the argument you're making is, and if you've researched before. If you've never done this sort of research before, you're probably going to have a hard time just navigating these sites in the first place. So don't be too discouraged if it's taking you a while. Again, I always have my office hours on Saturday from 12 to 3, so you can always come by there. You can also always just send, links to me or professor through email and say like, hey, can you check this out? Would this work for my argument? Or specific quotes. Again, try to have a specific like question in mind. Don't just say, hey, will you look at the site? It's like, okay, well, or look at this article. Like, what about this article do you want me to look at? But you also have quite a long time for this paper. I think it's the 16th. Let's look at that. Whoops. Where is it? So you have the 16th is due for the annotated bibliography, and then the first draft is due 2 days after. And then the final paper isn't due until the 7th of May. So we have quite a while for this essay. So reach out, use the time that's allotted. And if, research is taking a long time, just find one source one day, a few days later, find the next source, and a few days after that, find the next source. You don't have to just like sit down and spend 5 hours researching all in one day. Ideally it wouldn't take you 5 hours, but like I said, it still may take you a little while. So with that being said, if you have any questions, reach out to me, and we'll be going over some of this in class as well. So, it's not like it's just this one video and like, oh, you're on your own. You can always ask more questions. But good luck, and I will see you in class. All right, bye for now.